The body is half in the water, her eyes are open.
We're thinking, how did she spend her last hours?
The first emotion is hatred.
It's unthinkable. It's unthinkable that things like this can happen.
Why did she go there? Why Saint-Malo? And why that park?
She's groaning and screaming. Everything's macabre.
On Tuesday, February 28, 2012, in Saint-Malo, the body of a teenage girl is found at the bottom of a cliff.
We've just lost our sister, so we're all devastated. We don't understand what's going on or what's coming our way.
You think to yourself, what did she go through at the time? The poor girl must have suffered.
The 16-year-old victim's name is Céline Giboire.
I'm certain she called me that night because she had met the wrong kind of person. And she knew it. She tried to call me because she needed to feel safe.
The autopsy reveals that the teenager was raped.
A murder that would have been preceded by a brutal rape.
The investigators follow many leads. Why were some of the victim's belongings missing?
We feel that behind this, there's someone who wants to muddy the waters.
Maybe someone is carefully keeping the ID card at home as a souvenir of the terrible crime.
Who is the man who crossed paths with Céline shortly before her death?
This man had been involved in a homicide case.
Obviously, when the investigators come across this, they go bingo.
The police learned that a serial rapist was near Saint-Malo on the night of the incident.
He raped me, and at the same time, he was trying to kill me.
Jean-Marc Bloch, former head of the Versailles Police Department, and Negar Haedi, criminal lawyer, will join us as we look back on this unsolved case. On Monday, February 27, 2012, Patrick Giboire, a farmer, is working at his farm in Pirey-sur-Sèche in Brittany. It's around 5 p.m. when his wife, Marie-Paul, alerts him. Their daughter, Céline, age 16, is nowhere to be found.
I get a phone call from Marie-Paul saying, there's a problem. Céline isn't at school. Really?
Céline, a student at Jeanne d'Arc High School in Rennes, around 12 miles from her parents' house, has skipped all her afternoon classes. Hoping to get an explanation, Patrick contacts his two eldest daughters.
At that time, not necessarily worried yet, we try to contact her. Her phone doesn't go straight to voicemail, but it rings and rings.
But hours pass, and still there's no word from Céline, which is highly unusual.
That was the moment when I realized and said, this isn't normal.
At 7 p.m., Melanie and her sister, Elena, finally go to the Rennes police station to report their younger sister missing. But according to the police, there's no need to worry.
Oh, she's a 16-year-old girl. It's normal. She's run away. They don't take it seriously. We have to wait until tomorrow. She could be at a friend's place.
They think she left. She had enough. She went for a walk in the city. End of story.
Distraught, the Giboires contact Céline's friends. But no one has spoken to her, not even her best friend, Audrey.
I was surprised because she was usually easy to reach, so it was surprising.
Why did Céline skip class? Why isn't she answering the phone?
The night passes. We take the reins. In the end, my partner, my older sister, and I go to look for her in downtown Rennes.
It's a long night. We're thinking, what's happened?
The next morning, still without any news from Céline, the Giboirs make every effort to find the girl as soon as possible.
On Tuesday morning, there's no sign of her, so we put up posters everywhere.
The family puts up missing persons posters in the city. Their concern is growing. Céline Giboir's family doesn't understand why the teenager left her high school without telling anyone, and why she didn't come back to sleep in her dorm. Her parents, sisters, and brother do everything they can to try and find her. That's when the Saint-Malo police are informed that the body of a young girl has been found on a small beach. This young girl seems to have fallen from the top of a cliff. Some joggers made the gruesome discovery. The corpse is lying on its back in a small cove below Corbière Park in Saint-Servan, a district of Saint-Malo. It's 10:10 a.m. when the police arrive on the scene. They immediately go down to the foot of the cliff.
The body is half in the water. Her eyes are open. There is also a jacket in the water.
Some money is found in her coat, a sum of 53 euros. And her cell phone is also found.
The victim is wearing belted pants and a black t-shirt. She isn't wearing shoes. On her wrist, the young woman has a bracelet engraved with the words Céline, October 16, 1995. The connection is immediately made with Céline Giboir, who went missing 44 miles away in Rennes.
Identification is done quickly, simply because the day before, Céline's family called the police because their daughter was missing.
The police officers observed the position of the body.
The arms are back, like this, with the palms toward the sky.
This position of the body suggests to the investigators that perhaps someone dragged the body by the arms.
The Saint-Malo Fire Department is then responsible for transporting the body to the Maritime Gendarmerie premises near the cove. At 10:25 a.m., a family doctor comes to confirm the death. He notices several wounds and bruises, some compatible with the possibility of a fall, others unexplained.
When the family doctor arrives at the scene, he immediately points out that there are forensic countermeasures. He sees that her body bears multiple marks that suggest a suspicious death.
In search of clues, the Saint-Malo police search Corbière Park. On a railing overlooking the sea, they discover a white scarf and a pink jacket. From the ground, they pick up a pair of glasses. A few yards away, in a trash can, they find a purse containing a student card in the name of Céline Giboir.
When you find a victim's purse hidden in a trash can, you don't need a lawyer to think that somebody probably had something to hide, and that none of this is normal.
Next to this trash can, on a bench, are a pack of cigarettes and a lighter. At 4:40 p.m., the forensic police arrive on the scene. From the foot of the bench, they place 5 cigarette butts in evidence bags. The cliff is as high as a 5-story building, around 52 feet. Inspections are then carried out around the body's apparent point of impact.
This bloodstain that's seen on the rocks is called a contact point. There's a point of impact that has been photographed and measured, and then there's the place where she was found. The route is indicated to us by the bloodstains.
105 feet separate the place where Céline fell from the place where her body was found.
This immediately suggests the possibility that either the body was moved or Céline herself moved.
The crime scene investigators collect samples of these bloodstains.
At the beginning, all the standard samples for a homicide case were taken.
In Piré-sur-Sèche, where the Giboire family lives, no one knows that the teenager's body has just been found in Saint-Malo.
I was in the courtyard. I was with my boss. We were talking about the issue with Céline, and he said to me, "Don't worry, Patrick. It's a teenage thing. She wanted a change of scenery. She's gone for a walk. Don't worry, she'll come back." But then, when you see the mayor and the police arrive, that's it. You know it's over. Because when these people come to your house, it's to give you bad news.
For all the teenager's loved ones, the news of her death is a real shock.
We've just lost our sister, so we're all devastated. We don't really understand what's going on or what's coming our way.
When they tell me, "We found your daughter in Saint-Malo," I think to myself, what was she doing there? How come she went to Saint-Malo? I can't explain it.
How did Céline end up in Corbière Park? Did she commit suicide? Was she killed? The investigation must answer all these questions. Jean-Marc, we're at the very place where Céline Giboire's body was discovered. When the doctor came to confirm Céline Giboire's death, he checked the forensic countermeasure box on the death certificate. What exactly does this mean?
This means that the cause of death is not clear. The doctor can't say that it was a natural death. He believes that it may be an accidental death, suicide, or even homicide. If it's homicide, the public prosecutor will automatically be notified, open an investigation, and perhaps even request an autopsy. In our case, beyond the findings on the body which indicate injuries that can't be explained by a simple fall. There's the fact that the body is not at the foot of the cliff. The body has moved or been moved. If it has been moved, this means a third party is involved, so it's not a clear-cut suicide, far from it.
Especially since Céline Giboire fell 52 feet from the top of the cliff and her body was found here, 105 feet from the point of impact. It's hard to believe that she could have covered this distance by climbing over these rocks while seriously injured.
Yes, there are two things that intrigue me. First, the fact that her jacket was found in the water next to her, as if it had been taken off her or had slipped off when her body was being moved. And secondly, she is lying on her back, arms above her head, in line with the body, which fits with this idea.
We know, Jean-Marc, that sometimes murderers try to make their crimes look like suicide. Is that a possibility in our case?
Of course it's a possibility. If we consider the criminal possibility, either she was afraid of someone and tried to run away and fell, in this case it's manslaughter, or she was pushed by someone, which makes it first-degree murder. But without direct witnesses, it's very difficult to prove.
What other things stand out to you from the scene where the body was discovered, Jean-Marc?
First, I'm waiting for the results of the DNA tests on the 5 cigarette butts found near the bench. If these butts bear Céline's DNA, it means she sat on this bench for a while, and so witnesses could have seen her or even spoken to her. The other thing that strikes me at the beginning of the case is, as Patrick Giboire says, the mystery of Céline's trip from her high school in Rennes to this park in Saint-Malo. These two places are 45 miles apart. Céline is 16 years old. She can't drive. She couldn't have made this trip alone, so there are bound to be witnesses.
The Rennes Juvenile Unit is put on the investigation to try to find out the circumstances of Céline Giboire's death as quickly as possible. The teenager's parents and siblings are called in for questioning. The police must urgently learn about the victim's life and relationships. Céline Giboire grew up 15 miles from Rennes. in this house in Piré-sur-Sèche on her parents' farm, surrounded by her 4 siblings.
They liked to be together. They were a tight unit.
It's a family everyone dreams of having. When you see the brothers and sisters, how close they are to each other.
Céline's family and friends are questioned by the police. They all paint a picture of a happy and mischievous 16-year-old girl.
She was a young girl who was always smiling. I never saw Céline without a smile.
She was a very cheerful person. She always had something to laugh about. 7 years later, the main thing I remember is how she laughed.
In this close-knit family, Céline and her twin Laura are the youngest. The 2 sisters are particularly close.
She and Laura were a duo, and they got along really well.
I don't know. I think it's a connection that, unless you experience it, no one else can really understand. It's more than best friends. It's interdependent.
They needed to be with each other, to take care of each other.
But since starting 11th grade, Céline and Laura no longer went to the same school. Both at boarding schools in Rennes, during the week they took advantage of any free time to meet up.
On Wednesday afternoons, Laura and Céline didn't have class, so they met up to chat and go shopping together.
On Sunday, February 26, 2012, the day before Céline's disappearance, the Giboire family spent the day with neighbors. Natalie remembers that Céline was in high spirits, thrilled with the school trip she had just gone on to Romania.
She had just returned from her trip, so she had a lot to say. She talked about the monuments, what she saw, what she did, how it was different from here, the culture, so it was really interesting.
Natalie emotionally recalls her final conversation with Céline.
She was energetic, smiling, and very positive.
Why did Céline go to Saint-Malo? How did she fall off the cliff? These questions haunt Céline Giboire's family.
It's hard for us to accept what's happening, because everything is going well for our family. Then suddenly you're told, we found your daughter in Saint-Malo and she's dead. So you can't accept it, because you think to yourself, how did she end up there?
We had no connection with Saint-Malo. I don't even remember ever going to Saint-Malo. So we didn't know Saint-Servan at all, let alone Corbière Park.
The family and friends' statements don't support the theory of suicide. According to them, nothing in Céline's life can explain the tragedy. The prosecutor of Saint-Malo requests an autopsy of the body to establish how the young woman died. The results of this examination will determine what happens next in the case. On February 29, 2012, the day after the discovery, Céline Giboire's body is autopsied at the Rennes Forensic Institute. The medical examiner begins with the external examination of the body. On the back, several bruises and cuts are visible. On the stomach, there are only 2 scratches. The doctor then inspects the more serious injuries.
He describes traumatic injuries with some displaced fractures, especially on the upper and lower left limbs.
These multiple fractures confirm that Céline Giboire did fall from the 53-foot high cliff. The medical examiner continues and discovers significant anal injuries.
These injuries, as they are described, suggest penetration by a very hard object, causing significant injuries.
So Céline Giboire appears to have been raped. The internal examination of the body must now determine the cause of death. The respiratory tract becomes the center of the coroner's attention.
There are things like froth, that is to say, foam that has flooded the respiratory tract, which is unequivocal. This happens when someone is alive. That means that at the last moment, when she was in contact with the water, she was still alive.
The doctor concludes that Céline Giboire died of mechanical asphyxiation caused by the trauma of the fall.
Drowning was an additional element, but it wasn't the only element.
According to the expert, Céline's death occurred around midnight.
The body is fresh, hasn't been damaged by bad weather, and was found quickly.
Tests of the samples taken from Céline Giboire's body proved that she did not consume alcohol or drugs before falling from the cliff in Corbière Park. At the end of the autopsy, the medical examiner must answer a crucial question. Could Céline Giboire have moved after her fall, from the point of impact to the bottom of the cliff to the place where her body was discovered?
Once the fall and the injuries occurred, the only possible movement would be crawling. By leaning on the still healthy upper limb and moving the upper part of the torso. She certainly couldn't get back up on her own 2 feet after receiving the injuries, as they have been described.
The terrible scenario that I imagine is, on this cold night, this young girl is at the bottom of the cliff. She isn't dead. She's in pain. She has multiple fractures, but she isn't dead. She's groaning and screaming, which leads the other person in this story to come down the steps to the beach. Her body is dragged and placed carefully in the water, perhaps with the intention of concealing what has just happened. Maybe even in the hope that the tide will erase everything. That's the scenario that would seem the most horrible to me, because it's so macabre.
Céline's family soon finds out the results of the autopsy.
At first, I would say the first emotion is hatred. It's hatred and a mixture of sadness and anger at the end of the day.
Learning that his daughter has been raped is unbearable for Patrick Giboire.
You think, what did she go through at the time? What did he do to her? Because in those moments, we're thinking, how did she spend her last hours? Because to be found at the bottom of a cliff with fractures, the poor girl must have suffered. And after, there's the word rape. You think, the poor thing, who did she run into? All these things make you think her last moments were not easy.
On Saturday, March 3rd, 4 days after her death, Céline Giboire's funeral is held in Piré-sur-Sèche.
The church was full. We felt strong support from her high school classmates. There was really strong support and sadness.
In the church in Piré-sur-Sèche, confusion and anger reign.
Many families were thinking, it could have happened to my daughter. So it caused a stir throughout the region.
It's unthinkable. It's unthinkable that things like this can happen.
I was angry. I was sad. I didn't understand. I felt confused. It's frustrating not knowing.
Hagar, after the results of the autopsy, a legal investigation is opened for homicide and rape by the prosecutor's office of Saint-Malo. The rape has been established, but the medical examiner's findings were unable to prove that Céline was the victim of murder. In this case, why was an investigation opened with this double classification?
In a very simplified way, the investigation could be seen as a kind of funnel. The examining magistrate first classifies wider crimes to have the greatest freedom to investigate, knowing that, as the investigation progresses, some of them are unlikely to be penalized. In our case, the circumstances of Céline's death are not only unknown, but they're also suspicious, because she was allegedly raped just before. Under these circumstances, it's natural that the examining magistrate opted for the double classification of rape and murder, even if it meant ruling out the latter, possibly at the end of the investigation.
After the shocking news of their daughter's rape, Céline Giboire's parents didn't immediately decide to register as plaintiffs and hire a lawyer. Should they have done this?
It's difficult to judge parents who have experienced such a tragedy, but from the moment an investigation is opened into a case in which one considers oneself a victim, the best way to stay informed and to participate by requesting investigative measures is to become a party by registering as the plaintiff. In this case, the presence of a lawyer who knows the procedure, the magistrates, and the brutality of the justice system is recommended, even if it isn't mandatory.
After the formal investigation is opened by the prosecutor's office of Saint-Malo, the Rennes Police Department is put on the case. The investigation begins to try and determine who killed and raped Céline Giboire. The first step is to retrace the victim's final day. February 27, 2012 marked the start of a new school semester after winter break. At 7:15 a.m., Marie-Paule Giboire drove her two daughters, Laura and Céline, to their respective high schools in Rennes.
Every Monday morning, Marie-Paule took them and dropped one off at St. Martin's and the other at Jeanne d'Arc High School.
That morning, Céline headed back to school, like all high school students, after 2 weeks of break. It all started well with an A in history. A good grade for the serious and applied student.
No teacher ever said Céline was difficult in class, because her grades at Jeanne d'Arc were good. They weren't the top grades, but she got the passing grades easily, and her studies were going well.
However, according to her friend, Céline was upset. The reason was the school trip to Romania at the beginning of February. Contrary to what the teenager had told her parents, everything had not gone well.
There were conflicts with girls in her class. When you take a step back, they were the stupid things that happen between girls at high school.
Céline talked about the trip to Romania, but she only talked about the good parts. It was later that we learned it hadn't gone well.
Eric, a friend of Céline's who today prefers to testify anonymously, clearly remembers how on the first day back at school, this drama was at the heart of conversations.
The group of girls in question on that school trip asked me, "Do you like Céline?" I told them I did, and they said, "Because during the school trip, she followed us around like a little dog."
As the morning classes come to an end, Eric repeats these words to Céline.
She didn't react, but she was probably really hurt. It didn't seem to hit her that hard, because usually she would have gotten upset and gone straight to talk to that person.
The teenager then invited Céline to have lunch in the cafeteria with him, but she refused, claiming to have plans to eat with another friend. The girl's phone records prove that in fact she never went to the cafeteria. No one saw Céline in the lunch hall that day.
At that moment, at about 12:30 p.m., she ran away.
At 12:30, students saw her leaving the high school alone. According to witnesses who passed her, she calmly walked down Colonel Dryant Street, then Mesley Street. She seemed to be heading downtown. At 2 p.m., classes resumed, and Céline Giboire was absent.
After lunch, she wasn't there, so I thought she just hadn't come to class because of what had happened in the morning. But for me, it was, in quotes, normal. It was understandable, so I wasn't necessarily worried.
Especially since Celine sometimes skipped class with her friends.
We both skipped classes, but never important classes, and she didn't leave like that.
The police then try to determine what Celine Giboire did after leaving school. And above all, how did she travel the 44 miles from Rennes to Saint-Malo? Analysis of her phone's geolocation soon provides essential information. At 12:32 p.m., her phone was traced near the high school. More than 3 hours later, at 3:45, the cell phone was traced to Saint-Dominique, a town halfway between Rennes and Saint-Malo.
Saint-Dominique isn't the most well-known city between Rennes and Saint-Malo. I can't see why she was there. It seems really strange to me. I don't understand. Why Saint-Dominique? And why would she go there?
The investigators inspect Celine's phone, found in the pocket of her jacket.
On her phone, they find a photo of a map of Saint-Dominique.
Why did Celine take a picture of the information sign in Saint-Dominique on Monday, February 27, 2012?
That means she was looking for something specific. It's strange. I don't photograph a sign every time I go to a town, so it's pretty weird. She was looking for something specific.
What makes this map interesting is that from the outset, we think Celine knew where she was going. She knew where she wanted to go.
And 2 hours later, Celine's phone is traced to Saint-Malo. It was 5:48 p.m. when the girl arrived in the coastal city. It had been a little over 5 hours since she had left her high school without telling anyone.
Throughout that afternoon, several friends sent her messages.
But Celine never answered.
You can consider two possibilities. Either she was feeling resentful towards everyone, no one supported her, and she felt isolated. That's a reason not to respond to all these messages from friends. But there's another possibility. If you're in a car and someone next to you is threatening you, you can't answer your phone. You can't, while someone is watching you, pick up your phone and say, "Help! Help me!"
At 6:52 p.m., an hour after arriving in Saint-Malo, Celine finally phones her best friend. Audrey keeps thinking back to that call.
I'm certain she called me that night because she had met the wrong kind of person, and she knew it. She tried to call me because she needed to feel safe.
The two friends had a habit of calling each other whenever they were afraid.
I lived in an undesirable neighborhood, and whenever I felt unsafe, the person I called was Celine. It was code, too. I knew that if something happened to me, she was on the line and she could act quickly. And if she called me and she wasn't feeling good, I could do the exact same thing.
But when Celine, on February 27, 2012, at 6:52 p.m., tried to contact her friend, the latter didn't respond. She was doing her homework. 7 years after her friend's death, Audrey still regrets not picking up the phone that night.
Even if everyone tells you not to feel guilty for not answering, I was doing my homework. It's stupid. But of course, you feel guilty. She managed to answer every time, and I didn't. I feel bad.
Why did Celine call Audrey? What was she hoping for when she made this call?
Was it a call from a friend who felt threatened because someone was actually threatening her? Was it a desperate cry for help?
Unfortunately, if the call had gone through, if the friend had picked up, maybe that would have changed things. We'll never know.
Audrey would have wanted to know what her friend was doing in Saint-Malo.
Why did she go there? Why Saint-Malo? And why that park? I always have this question about the park. But I've been to Saint-Malo 20 times, and it isn't a park we go to. We never go to Corbière Park. It's hidden. I didn't even know it existed before.
The teenager's phone records make it possible to retrace Céline Giboire's journey from her high school in Rennes to Corbière Park, where she died. It took her almost 5 hours to travel the 44 miles along this highway. The investigators now want to find out how and with whom the teenager made the trip. On March 1st, 3 days after the discovery of Céline Giboire's body, the police decide to broadcast an appeal for witnesses. The priority is to establish how Céline got to Saint-Malo.
There are city buses. There are also regional buses which cover a greater distance. There are even direct buses that go to Saint-Malo. Our research starts by studying footage from the urban buses of Rennes. That's kind of the starting point.
The bus drivers are questioned, but none of them remember seeing the girl. Video surveillance footage from the station and the city of Rennes don't offer any more information. The investigators then come up with a theory.
Then we think, what if she hitchhiked? She could have hitchhiked. So one of our priorities is, of course, to try to identify the person or people who could have given her a lift.
The police hope that the appeal for witnesses will bear fruit. And in just a few hours, several individuals come forward to the Saint-Malo police station.
Various people saw a young girl matching Céline's description hitchhiking on the highway from Rennes to Saint-Malo.
Apparently, at least twice, she was seen at the edge of the highway, next to the emergency lane.
But the girl's loved ones find it difficult to believe these testimonies.
I don't know about hitchhiking. Leaving her high school because she was sick of it? Yes, but not so far away. And not by hitchhiking. That really surprises me.
Her mom said, but in any case, she had money to take the bus. And Céline was more the type to take the bus than to hitchhike. It didn't fit at all with Céline's habits.
However, the witnesses are categorical. Some even say that they spoke with Céline. In Tanteniac, a town about 19 miles from Rennes, a man explains that he was approached between 3 and 4 p.m. by a young girl who closely resembled Céline Giboire. The teenager allegedly asked him how to hitchhike to Saint-Dominique. And in Saint-Dominique, Céline Giboire was also identified.
There's another restaurant owner who describes a very smiley and friendly young girl who asked him if there was a bus to Saint-Malo.
According to this restaurant owner, it was between 3:30 and 4 p.m. when he met Céline Giboire, who seemed determined to get to Saint-Malo.
This fits exactly with the route determined by the cell phone's positioning, which was traced along the way several times, notably in Saint-Dominique.
In the late afternoon, around 5:45, Céline Giboire was spotted by two individuals, this time in Saint-Malo, a few hundred yards from the entrance to Corbière Park. And these witnesses tell the police an important detail. Céline got out of a car crying.
It's an important detail. You see a young girl getting out of a car, crying. You think something bad has happened.
As night fell, the girl was then allegedly spotted by a couple who were walking in Corbière Park. These individuals came forward to give their testimony at the Saint-Malo police station after finding the investigators' appeal for witnesses in their mailbox. This man and woman, who we will now call Marc and Gaël, say that it was around 6:45 p.m. when they saw Céline Giboire.
One of them describes Céline sitting on a bench smoking a cigarette.
This last testimony is indisputable. Because of the 5 cigarette butts collected from the foot of the bench, 4 bear Céline Giboire's DNA. Thanks to all these testimonies, the investigators have the impression that they've retraced Céline's journey from Rennes to the place where she died.
She was definitely seen on the edge of the highway. It's very likely that was her. It matches the route, it matches the timing, and it matches the place.
But which car did Céline get into? Who dropped her off in Saint-Malo?
There's no direct testimony from the person she hitchhiked with. No one came forward to the investigators to say, Céline Gibois got into my car. She asked me to take her to Saint-Malo. No witness came forward about this. You wonder if maybe the driver who picked her up didn't just take her to the park, but went a little further and could be involved in something more serious.
Jean-Marc, we now know for certain what Céline Gibois did after leaving her high school. Thanks to the testimonies, we know that she hitchhiked, stopped in Tanteniac, and then Saint-Dominique before arriving by car in Saint-Malo.
Yes, that's true. Not only do all these testimonies make it possible to reconstruct Céline Gibois' itinerary, but they are also confirmed by her cell phone's geolocation. So these witnesses are telling the truth. What's more, some of them spoke with Céline.
However, Céline's family and friends are convinced that she would never have hitchhiked.
Yes, I know from experience that investigations often reveal behavior that the victim's loved ones find hard to accept. Patrick thinks his daughter would never have considered hitchhiking. He also thinks that she would never have considered going to Saint-Malo. However, the facts show that she decided to go to this city.
Why did she want to go to Saint-Malo? Do you think she was meeting someone?
I don't think so. Her phone records show that she neither received nor made any phone calls between leaving school and arriving in Saint-Malo. It's therefore very unlikely that she had scheduled an appointment in this city.
The restaurant owner from Saint-Dominique, who spoke to Céline, remembers that she was smiling and very friendly. However, the two witnesses who saw her getting out of a car in Saint-Malo say she was crying. Do you think she had an unpleasant encounter on the last part of her journey? Do you think she may have even been raped before being dropped off in Saint-Malo?
No. Otherwise, how can it be explained that she was seen sitting alone on a bench in Corbière Park, smoking a cigarette? If she had been raped in the car, she would have called for help when getting out of the car. She would have sought refuge. No, I interpret her crying differently. Céline is 16 years old. She has run away. She left her high school, and for 5 hours, she has been in a difficult situation that she must already regret.
And why, Jean-Marc, did she go to a park she wasn't familiar with?
Well, this park is next to where the car dropped her off. She's disoriented. She needs to think. She goes inside the park and sits down on a bench. She smokes cigarettes, and then at 6:52 p.m., she tries to call her friend Audrey to get out of this stalemate. Alas, she doesn't answer. I think the assault occurred afterwards.
The investigators have collected numerous testimonies allowing them to retrace Céline Gibois' steps. But they still have no evidence to explain what happened to her in Corbière Park. They decide to question the two witnesses again who saw the teenager on the bench just hours before her death. Marc and Gaël live right in front of the entrance to Corbière Park. It seems that they were the last people to see Céline Gibois alive. They remember their astonishment at seeing this young girl alone at night.
The man said to the woman, "Hey, do you see that girl over there? She doesn't look okay."
Marc and Gaël say they didn't speak to Céline. However, the investigators find out that one of the cigarette butts collected from near the park bench bears Gaël's DNA, which could suggest that she spent some time close to Céline Gibois. But she explains that she goes there regularly to smoke, so it's just a coincidence. Then, a police officer, when meeting this couple who have come to testify at the police station, gets the feeling that he recognizes the man.
A colleague interviewing the witness, a former detective from Rennes, remembered this man being involved in a homicide case.
What if Marc isn't telling the whole truth?
He has a criminal record, and so his profile is of interest.
The investigators think this is astonishing. You have someone with a criminal record who says he came to the park to walk his dog, and then you have Céline, and what happened next?
For the investigators, this lead is very interesting. They decide to take Marc and his partner Gaël into custody.
His partner was also questioned and taken into police custody at the same time. So we gave ourselves every opportunity to explore what could be the start of a murder story.
At the same time, a search is carried out of the couple's home.
Some surprising discoveries are made. His partner has been collecting all the newspaper articles about Céline's case. She cuts them up and she keeps them.
On these press clippings, Gaëlle made some annotations proving her macabre interest in the Giboire case.
So honestly, this is intriguing.
Obviously, when the investigators come across this, they go, bingo. It's surprising.
Questioned simultaneously, Mark and Gaëlle do not give the same account of their walk in Corbière Park on the evening of February 27, 2012.
One says the girl was in a well-lit place, to the point that he could see the features of her face. The other says she was in such a poorly lit place that she was unable to discern any of her facial features or the slightest detail.
However, Mark and Gaëlle coincide in denying any involvement in the murder of Céline Giboire. There's no material evidence against them. They walk free from the police station after 8 hours and 45 minutes in custody.
It was by chance that these people who lived nearby were walking their dog when Céline was there. There's no connection between them and the victim.
There are no charges against this man and his partner today. Just after the lead of the last witnesses to see Céline alive has closed, an intriguing event shakes up the investigation. On March 5th, 6 days after the teenager's death, some walkers find her Social Security card. The card is stuck between two stones as if deliberately hidden, a few dozen yards from the place where the body was found. This discovery adds even more mystery to the Céline Giboire case.
Why go and put cards between two stones? Why hide them? It doesn't make any sense. For me, it's illogical.
We feel that behind this, there's someone who wants to muddy the waters.
No DNA is found on the Social Security card.
They should have been more careful at the scene where the body was discovered. They should have prevented any unauthorized access to the scene. There are surely things that have escaped the investigators, maybe scattered around. We don't know.
Céline's ID card, for example, has never been found, even though her parents confirmed that she always had it on her.
They asked us, "Are you sure you haven't found the ID card in her room?" We knew she had her ID card in her wallet all the time. So someone has the ID card.
Why has this document never been found?
Maybe someone is carefully keeping the ID card at home as a souvenir of the terrible crime.
On March 7, 2012, it's already been a week since Céline died, and a legal investigation into rape and murder was opened. But the investigation has been unable to solve the mystery surrounding the circumstances of her death. Then, the Genetic Institute of Nantes provides the results of the tests carried out on Céline Giboire's clothes. On her panties, there is no trace of sperm, but an incomplete DNA profile has been revealed.
It's the trace of the paternal line of the Giboire family. The DNA is mixed with her own DNA.
The test revealed that this DNA profile could belong to Céline's father.
I thought, that's it. They're going to say that I'm the culprit. That's it. They're going to try to prove that I was the one who molested Céline. And you think to yourself, where is this heading?
Anaïg Lenoir remembers her client's terror.
When I looked into the dad's eyes, it was like, on top of everything, I have to cope with this. I didn't like it.
The scientific explanation is soon found. The DNA on Céline's panties is contact DNA that has nothing to do with the circumstances of her death.
All the children put their laundry in the dirty laundry basket. Everything was mixed up and there was contamination.
Patrick is immediately ruled out of the case. A week later, on March 15, 2012, the Giboire family must endure a new ordeal. The examining magistrate orders the exhumation of Celine's body to carry out a new autopsy.
I get a phone call from Gallo, the police chief, who says, "Mr. Giboire, there's a problem." Really? What's the problem? And he tells me, "We're going to have to dig up your daughter's body because we haven't done all the examinations and samples that we should have."
Patrick remembers this phone call word for word.
I tell him bluntly, "Instead of letting us bury Celine, you should have stopped that. Now we have to dig up Celine's body and redo things. For the family, it's really hard. Already having lost your daughter, and now you have to dig her up. You think, when are they going to let her rest in peace?"
The objective of this additional autopsy is to confirm whether Celine Giboire was raped before her death.
These new examinations find injuries in the anal region, including the sphincter, with lacerations that could suggest trauma by penetration from a very large and harmful object.
We're talking about an object that would have been inserted in an extremely violent way. So this reinforces even more the theory of a murder that would have been preceded by a brutal rape.
The examining magistrate also asked the responsible for this second autopsy if it's possible that Celine moved alone across the rocks after her fall.
What is certain is that she couldn't move normally. She could only move on one side. The last examinations showed that she was paraplegic after that fall.
Negar, I'd like to come back to the police investigation into Celine Giboire's last day, and more specifically, the study of her phone records. What's the legal framework surrounding the collaboration between police forces and telephone service providers?
The investigators send legal requisitions to the service providers to receive phone records that are necessary for the investigation. The service providers have a legal obligation to cooperate with the authorities. The law goes even further, since it sets out financial remuneration to the service providers. €4.59 to get someone's identity from their phone line, and €15.30 for a detailed record. Coming back to our case, this is how the journey of Celine Giboire, who had a phone contract, could be traced.
As we've seen, the couple who crossed paths with Celine Giboire that evening in Corbière Park came under suspicion. This man and woman were taken into custody, but the interrogations lasted only 8 hours and 45 minutes. Who decides to end custody? Is there a minimum duration?
There is no minimum duration. As soon as the reasons that justified the police custody are no longer valid, the person must be released from custody on the instructions of the public prosecutor. If this man and woman ended up being released after only 8 hours and 45 minutes, which isn't long enough for a rape and murder case, this means the investigators quickly deemed that they were not involved in the crime.
On July 6, 2012, almost 5 months after Celine Giboire's death, the public prosecutor of Saint-Malo holds a press conference. He says, and I quote, "The autopsy confirms a sexual assault preceded the girl's death." Negar, in criminal cases, public prosecutors often speak to the press. Are they the only ones who have the right to communicate information about ongoing investigations?
Yes, that's set out in the Code of Criminal Procedure. According to Article 11 of this code, investigations are, in principle, secret proceedings. But since citizens also sometimes need to be informed about ongoing cases, and since it's necessary to avoid inaccurate or incomplete leaks that could undermine the presumption of innocence, an additional paragraph has been added to Article 11, authorizing the public prosecutor to reveal certain objective details of the proceedings. These are called publicity windows. This is the best solution the legislator has found to reconcile three conflicting principles: the secrecy of the investigation, the freedom of the press, and the presumption of innocence.
Weeks pass and no new information is provided to Céline Giboir's family. The teenager's parents know that the investigation is ongoing, but they have stopped receiving news about the proceedings.
The first thing we, the family, did was trust the police. As time passed, the police didn't give us much information. No one came back to see us.
Patrick and Marie-Paul Giboir request a meeting with the examining magistrate and their lawyer.
We wanted to ask some questions. The magistrate replied, "Ask your lawyer your questions, and the lawyer will send them to me." I thought it was terrible, because not responding to the family in person seemed deplorable.
I remember that I intervened, and it didn't go well with the magistrate. I intervened so that the dad or the mom wouldn't go crazy from the way they were being treated. I wouldn't say it was contempt. I wouldn't go that far. But it was indifference, which is the same thing when you're suffering like they are.
On the police's side, the investigation continues and progresses.
In France, at the national level, we conducted research to look for similar cases.
And 8 months after Céline Giboir's death, the profile of a man arrested in Toulouse in November 2012 attracts the police's attention. This man's name is Florian Varane. He is 21 years old. He was arrested after raping and attempting to kill 23-year-old Marie in Toulouse. Today, this young woman has agreed to revisit this terrible assault because she thinks Céline Giboir may have crossed paths with Florian Varane in Saint-Malo.
Yes, technically it's possible. He knows this region very well. He travels around a lot. You mentioned an anal injury. That isn't out of the ordinary for him. There are a lot of things. That lead me to think it would make sense for this lead to be examined.
Marie will never forget that Saturday, November 4, 2012, when she met Florian Varane.
When I entered my building's lobby, someone came in right behind me. He wouldn't let go of me, so I pushed him back a little with my hand on him, like this, so that he would step back. I didn't even have time to say anything. He punched me, and I passed out. When I woke up, it was because he was on top of me. I was on my back, and he was sitting on top of me, and he was strangling me. And at that moment, at the same time as he was raping me, he was trying to kill me.
Florian Varane stated, "I squeezed her neck so that she would stop screaming and shouting. She stopped. We know she passed out. As soon as she stopped, he stopped the pressure that he was exerting on her neck."
It's a miracle that I'm still alive. He didn't just hit me, he strangled me. So yes, he tried to kill me.
Soon, the Toulouse police established that Florian Varane has committed other sexual assaults.
From the end of 2011 to November 2012, he was accused of 6 acts of rapes, 1 attempted murder, and 1 sexual assault on young girls.
And it turns out that Florian Varane committed one of these sexual assaults in Rennes. He was therefore familiar with the region where Céline Givoire lived. The young man's profile is of interest because all of his victims agree that he was not threatening when he approached them. Could this man be involved in Céline Givoire's death?
Well, maybe the culprit has been found, maybe the perfect culprit.
8 months after the murder of Céline Givoire, the arrest of the serial rapist revives the investigation.
It seems legitimate. It's very common when crimes of this nature happen in a geographical area for the police to question people who are being investigated directly or indirectly.
The Florian Varane theory is obviously of interest.
One more thing that makes this lead even more serious. Questioned by the Toulouse examining magistrate, Florian Varane makes an offhand remark about a young girl who fell off a cliff in Saint-Malo.
In the transcript, it's noted that she asked him if he had any feelings towards his victims. And he said that a friend of his stopped talking to him because of a girl who allegedly threw herself off a cliff in Saint-Malo.
The Rennes investigators leading the case of the murder and rape of Céline Givoire decide to pursue this lead. They try to find out where Florian Varane was on February 27, 2012.
The investigation determines that he was staying in Combourg, not very far from Saint-Malo or Saint-Servan.
Combourg is a small town 25 miles from Saint-Malo.
At the time, Florian was an apprentice mechanic from November 2011 to June 2012. It was in the middle of that period. At that time, he was doing an apprenticeship.
That day, Florian Varane worked in his garage from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m., then from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m.
We see that he has the right profile. He's a smooth talker, so I can see Céline trusting him. This person probably said things to her like, "You want a change of scenery? No worries. I'll take you. We'll go to Saint-Malo." Besides, he knows that area very well.
Questioned by detectives who are investigating the murder and rape of Céline Givoire, the young man states that he can't remember what he did when he got off work. No doubt he had dinner as usual at his grandparents' house where he was living.
Florian Varane has an alibi. He was questioned. He has witnesses who corroborate his testimony and his statements. They explain that at a certain time that evening, he was not at Corbière Park.
Florian Varane is someone we have ruled out as a possible lead.
Florian Varane, in some cases, has been pretty good at misdirecting leads. He's capable of traveling significant distances to throw off the investigators and forge an alibi.
The case is at an impasse. The investigators have already closed several credible leads. Then the examining magistrate orders another forensic examination. For this, she appoints the medical examiners at the Paris Forensic Institute. The latter present their conclusions on July 17, 2013, a year and a half after Céline Givoire's death. The medical examiners at the Paris Forensic Institute cast doubt on all the investigations that had been carried out for over a year.
Against all odds, the conclusions totally contradict the previous reports.
The results of this examination at the Paris Forensic Institute say that the anal wound is totally compatible with a fall.
This would mean that Céline was not raped.
The experts say, no, there was no sexual violence. Nothing was inserted into Céline's anus. No, all these injuries can be perfectly explained by Céline's fall. So basically, Celine allegedly impaled herself on a rock when she fell.
Another conclusion from these new medical examiners is that Celine could have moved alone after her fall.
Secondly, the experts say she was able to move, so she moved by herself to the place where she was found in the water for 105 feet.
The medical examiners determined that she was only paraplegic and she could crawl.
The second opinion supports the theory that Céline Giboire voluntarily took her own life. She allegedly threw herself off the cliff, then crawled into the cove.
The investigators say, you know, someone who commits suicide is capable of things you would never suspect.
This conclusion astounds everyone familiar with the scene and anyone who has been following the case since the start.
How could this young girl travel 105 feet across the rocks on rugged and difficult terrain? But it doesn't end there. Just by using one wrist, this young girl, who has traveled 105 feet, turns around to half submerge herself in the water to commit suicide by drowning. Even while I say it, I can't believe it. I'm trying to consider it from every angle, but it doesn't fit. Something doesn't add up. Who can believe it? Well, the investigators believe it.
Oh yes, she committed suicide. Celine took her own life. Yeah, that's it, of course. It's totally out of character. It's not believable.
The examining magistrate and the Rennes police pursue the suicide lead. They want to know more about the girl's state of mind at the time of her death. The Giboire's home is searched. The teenager's bedroom is at the center of the inspection.
We find a DVD of the Virgin Suicides movie. It's a movie from maybe the 1980s about suicide in a very rigid family setting. The fact that we find this in Céline's room sheds some light on her personality. Maybe she was in a somewhat morbid phase.
For the investigators, this is overwhelming evidence. But if every investigation was conducted like that, by finding DVDs and movies about suicide, and by searching through the movie collections of every victim from the last 100 years, you'd be able to solve a lot of cases.
Notes written by Céline also attract the investigators' attention.
They shed light on her mood at the time. We took them into account. They point to someone who is in a somewhat depressed phase.
Was Céline Giboire really thinking about ending her life when she wrote these notes? Her sister Melanie doesn't believe it for a second.
I did the same things she did. I wrote a lot, and I think in my room those things could have very well been found. And for all that, here I am. I'm 31 years old and here in front of you.
Supported by the third forensic exam, the police put forward a scenario. Inconsolable and driven to despair following the dispute with her friends at Jeanne d'Arc High School, Céline allegedly decided to go to Saint-Malo to kill herself.
No, she wouldn't have killed herself in Corbière. No, it doesn't make any sense to me. I don't believe it at all. Someone who's thinking about ending their life doesn't call a friend. They call their family. She had a twin sister. She would have called Laura.
She would have told her twin sister about it, but she didn't. The truth is, that's the big question mark.
Laura, after the fact, could have said this or that was a warning sign, but there was nothing. There were no signs. There was nothing. There was nothing that fit.
But for the investigators, there's no longer any doubt. A Rennes police commissioner is responsible for informing the family the turn the investigation is taking.
He explained to us everything that had been done, all the research. Then the interview happened, and when he left, he told us, "Stop beating yourself up. Your daughter was suicidal," as if to say, "Leave us alone. It was suicide."
This theory is unacceptable for Céline Giboire's parents. They knew their daughter, and they know that she never had a depressive episode.
That's what made me angry. Them saying, we're never going to look into the case to demonstrate that someone else was behind it. If she really wanted to kill herself, she didn't need to go to Saint-Malo. There's everything you'd need in Rennes. There's the river, the bridges, the railway tracks. You don't have to go all the way to Saint-Malo to commit suicide.
Jean-Marc, the medical examiners from the Paris Forensic Institute concluded that Céline Giboire was not raped. This obviously calls the entire investigation into question. This would mean that it's no longer homicide, but suicide. Can you explain why this third autopsy was worlds apart from the first two?
I know that unlike the first autopsies, this last examination was done on the basis of the photos taken when the body was discovered and during the autopsy and on the various documents found during the investigation. Whereas the Rennes medical examiners performed a real autopsy on the victim's body and even went to the scene to check their conclusions against the reality of the terrain, although God knows if, in this case, knowledge of the terrain is of particular importance.
What you're saying is that we should take the Paris Forensic Institute's results with a pinch of salt.
No, I'm just saying that there's no reason to believe the Parisian experts more than the experts from Rennes. We often tend to favor the conclusions of the latest examination, but I know from experience that this isn't always accurate. The Parisian medical examiners are no more infallible than their colleagues in the provinces.
Jean-Marc, the Parisian experts also concluded that Céline was able to move after her fall, despite her very serious injuries. However, we can both see that even standing up, it's difficult to travel over all these rocks.
Yes, that's true. And if Céline had crawled, the front of her body, her torso and her legs would bear wounds and cuts. However, no examination has revealed such injuries.
So if I understand correctly, you don't believe the suicide theory?
No, I find it hard to believe, especially since the victim profile didn't show that Céline had any suicidal tendencies. It's true that some teenagers take their own lives without anyone seeing it coming, without any warning signs. But when it comes to Céline, there's something unique. She had a twin sister, Laura, with whom she had an interdependent relationship, yet she never told her about any angst that could have driven her to suicide.
Céline Giboire's parents feel like no one believes their daughter was raped and murdered anymore. They feel like they've been abandoned by the justice system. However, they keep saying Céline did not commit suicide. That's when Patrick receives a very important phone call. In June 2015, more than 3 years after Céline Giboire's death, a reporter from Brittany on a business trip in Toulouse contacts the teenager's father. This man has left his region to cover Florian Varand's trial.
A reporter called me who attended the trial in Toulouse. And the first thing the reporter told me, because he was used to following this type of trial, was, Mr. Giboire, there's no two ways about it. I'm certain he's the person behind your daughter's tragedy. He's the one behind it.
Now 24 years old, Florian Varand appears before the Haute-Garonne Criminal Court for 6 sexual assaults and the attempted murder of Marie. During this trial, the lawyer of one of the serial rapist victims questions the defendant about Céline Giboire. We're trying to retrace your crimes. Do you know Céline Giboire? She was found dead at the bottom of a cliff in Saint-Malo in February 2012.
If I recall correctly, because I was really dazed, he said his credit card had been found nearby, but he had nothing to do with it. It had a pretty big impact on the court.
Until then, there had never been any question of a credit card belonging to Florian Varand being found on Corbière Beach.
He brought up the credit card thing himself. No one was asking him about it at the time.
Florian Varand's answer to the lawyer is highly interesting, because in the Giboire case file, there's the testimony of an elderly woman who could attest to the serial rapist's presence in Saint-Malo when Céline died. This woman, who was walking with her grandchildren on the beach the day after the teenager's body was discovered, remembers crossing paths with a young man looking for his bank card.
This elderly woman clearly states that this young man, who she spoke to, told her he was looking for his bank card. She even says that the young man looked a bit shifty. She didn't see his face entirely.
This woman came forward to give her testimony at the Saint-Malo police station. Some investigations were carried out, in vain.
I believe the young man was never identified. Varane is someone we ruled out, after investigations, of course, because at first, he was a person of interest.
The problem is that this elderly lady has now passed away. If her testimony wasn't looked into, maybe it's because it was difficult to look into.
Could the man who was searching for his bank card below Corbière Park be Florian Varane? The serial rapist's bank statements are studied, and the investigators learned that Florian Varane did not use his one and only credit card between February 17th and March 5th, 2012.
During those days, Céline died. It's disconcerting. There's some things that, for the instant, are coming together.
For Florian Varane's lawyers, this story is just a simple coincidence.
This link is particularly tenuous and cannot permit us to contemplate that he could be guilty of something so serious.
But for Céline Giboire's relatives, this lead remains of interest.
There are too many things that fit. And for me, draw parallels with what happened with Céline.
Mr. Varane has the right profile. The young girls who were unfortunately his victims have a similar description to Céline.
Florian Varane was questioned by the Rennes investigators. No material evidence implicated him in Céline Giboire's death.
Today, absolutely no link has been established between Florian Varane and Céline Giboire. It's not his defense lawyers who are saying this. It's the authorities. There's absolutely no evidence. You'd think that if there had been even a single clue that could link him directly or indirectly to this case, the authorities would have got hold of it and would have at least placed him under the status of assisted witness. That isn't the case.
Nagar, according to Florian Varane's lawyer, the fact that her client has not been placed under the status of assisted witness proves there's no evidence to implicate him in the case. Can you explain to us what an assisted witness is?
This is someone who's implicated in an investigation, but with less serious charges than the accused. There are two sets of consequences. Because the assisted witness is implicated, they have certain rights: to be assisted by a lawyer and to have access to and participate in the proceedings, notably by asking the examining magistrate to carry out certain investigative measures. But because their situation is less serious than the accused, the assisted witness can't be subjected to any restrictive measures, so they can't be placed under judicial supervision or in pretrial detention.
The lawyer of one of Florian Varane's victims also happens to be the attorney of Céline Giboire's brothers and sisters. This is why he questioned Florian Varane during his trial about the Céline Giboire case. Is it permitted at a trial to discuss a case other than the one for which the defendant is being tried?
No. The trial is based on a procedure by the examining magistrate called the arraignment, which involves reading out all the offenses with which the defendant is charged. The consequence is that this arraignment limits the court's jurisdiction, which can only recognize these charges and no others. So, coming back to our case, Florian Varane shouldn't have been asked any other questions about the Céline Giboire case during his trial.
Patrick has spoken out against the attitude of the investigators and the examining magistrate. He laments their tactlessness and complains that he was not kept informed throughout the investigation. Is this a common attitude from the authorities towards victims' families?
No, of course not. But like in every profession, it all depends on the individual's personality and sensitivity. What's certain is that for a person outside the legal world, especially a victim who must deal with grief, has legitimate questions, and urgently wants them answered, the proceedings can seem abrupt. This is why a lawyer who can act as a buffer is essential.
Every day, the Giboire family fears that the examining magistrate will dismiss the case and the authorities will stop looking into the circumstances of Céline's death. However, there are other investigations that could be carried out.
There's a possibility that I find interesting. It simply involves asking the question, in the preceding weeks or months, were there any young girls who went missing in similar places? In this case, cliffs, and whose causes of death are also unexplained.
Working on this lead, Alan Pirot discovers that a young woman disappeared in Étretat in Normandy on January 20th, 2012, a month before Céline's death.
At the top of a cliff, personal items are found belonging to a young woman, Alice Bouzlan, who disappeared the day before. The similarities with the Céline Giboire case are astonishing.
Could there be a link between the disappearance of this 21-year-old student and the death of Céline Giboire?
This young woman was supposed to go home to her parents. Her suitcase was packed, her bed was stripped, and then she was gone. She was supposed to take the bus to her parents' house. She didn't take it. In any case, she wasn't seen taking it.
Alan would have liked further investigations to be carried out.
When I mentioned this lead to some investigators, I found out they hadn't even looked into it. Some didn't even know about it. They didn't try to find out if there were similarities between the cases.
We didn't make a connection between the suicide cases. This is the first time I've heard of it.
Unlike Céline Giboire's body, Alice Bouzlan's has never been found.
I would like to point out that Alice Bouzlan is currently registered in the missing persons database. There are 2 disappearances of young women, which could have a lot of similarities with Céline's. Is it time to search the west of France? Is it time to expand the area?
It's true that sex offenders often change regions to commit their crimes.
We have to expand the possibilities. This, unfortunately, is not happening with the Céline Giboire case, which, in my opinion, is limited to too small an area.
In 2016, 4 years after Céline's death, the Giboire family's lawyers get the judicial police taken off the case. It's now the homicide unit of the Rennes Gendarmerie who are on the case. They start by launching a new appeal for witnesses to find the drivers with whom Céline Giboire would have hitchhiked 4 years earlier.
There are obviously people who know something and who, to this day, haven't said anything. Maybe that's good news in this case. There are people who know something. It's time for them to speak.
But no new testimony has revived the investigation.
There was media coverage that could have scared people off, who could have simply said, yes, I picked up a young girl and I dropped her off at such and such a place.
I understand that it's scary, but you have to understand that there are people who are counting on the truth to come out. It's impossible to grieve properly when you don't know what happened. The investigation needs help. It's got to keep moving forward. Céline's parents need to know. Laura needs to know.
We heard Alan Pirot, a reporter, mention the disappearance of a young student in Étretat. According to him, this story has similarities with the death of Céline Giboire, and yet no connection was made by the investigators. Does this surprise you?
No, absolutely not. To be able to make connections between cases, there must be specific evidence. When it comes to the Céline Giboire case, yes, we have some specific evidence. But as for the disappearance of Alice Bouzlan, we have nothing. A young woman was at the top of the cliff and disappeared. We don't even know if she's dead or alive. Her body hasn't been found. On the one hand, a young girl at the top of a cliff in Saint-Malo. On the other, a young woman at the top of a cliff in Étretat. It's too insubstantial to make any comparisons.
In our case, there are two serious leads that have been considered by the investigators: the couple who were walking in Corbière Park and the serial rapist Florian Varane. Do you think they were investigated thoroughly enough?
The couple who live near Corbière Park were the last people to see Céline Giboire alive. What's more, the man has a criminal record as long as his arm. Notably, he's involved in a murder case. As for the woman, it turns out she collected press clippings about Céline Giboire's death. So there's something to be said for that.
However, at the time, the investigators considered that there was no material evidence connecting the couple to the case.
That's not true. At the foot of the bench where Céline Giboire was sitting, there were 5 cigarette butts, 4 of which bear her DNA. The 5th bears the DNA of this woman who collects articles about her death. This woman, in her defense, says that she used to sit on this bench to smoke cigarettes, and that this butt could have been there for some time. But I find it hard to believe that on that evening she didn't speak to Céline Giboire, so it's essential to question her again.
The other lead in this case, Jean-Marc, concerns Florian Varane. Indicted for several cases of rape and an attempted murder, this man lived and worked at the time of the events near Saint-Malo. Do you think there are still investigations to be carried out into this individual?
Yes, it's very disturbing. This man, during legal proceedings that have nothing to do with our case, declares, unprompted, that he is aware of a young girl who was allegedly found at the bottom of a cliff in Corbière Park. His alibi is corroborated by his grandparents, but it's extremely fragile. I think this too merits further investigation.
In this case, numerous testimonies have been collected, in particular from people who met Céline on the road between her high school in Rennes and Saint-Malo. However, none of the drivers who picked her up came forward. It's a real shame, Jean-Marc.
It's very regrettable, because it's possible that Céline confided in these drivers. It would be of particular interest for the final driver to come forward, to find out if they decided to drop her off near Corbière Park, or if it was Céline herself who asked to be dropped off there. Unfortunately, I have the feeling that from the start of this investigation, the police have favored the suicide theory to come out with their heads held high. The suicide label shouldn't make it possible to close an unsolved case with a clear conscience.
I think about her very often. I think she's part of us. And now, today, we're the only ones who can keep her alive by talking about her.
I will never accept the word suicide, because if she was hurt, the person who hurt Céline must pay.
It's impossible for me to even think about grieving. I think that's why I will carry on trying to find the person or people who did this.
For me, today, to grieve, the case must be wrapped up. The person who hurt her must be found, because Céline didn't deserve that.
The Giboire family will never accept a dismissal of the case without the investigation clearing up the circumstances of Céline's death.
If the case is dismissed, I think it'll be a legal mess. It'll be the start of a legal battle by the Giboire family. I don't believe the family will take a case dismissal lying down.
I think the fact that we're fighting is minor compared to what she went through. If only for her, and to be able to move on too, I personally would do anything I can to make sure it moves forward.
It's impossible to accept the injustice of a child's death. Céline Giboire was only 16 years old when her parents suddenly learned she was dead, when they learned that their daughter had been the victim of a brutal crime. The investigation has not been able to alleviate their suffering. On the contrary, their questions remain unanswered. Today, Céline Giboire's family is fighting to find out the truth, the whole truth, whatever it may be. They can only accept the unacceptable if there's irrefutable evidence.